Welcome back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan, and we're doing Once Upon a Time in China 2 this week, which, if you tuned in for Once Upon a Time in China 1, thank you. Actually, in just a few short weeks, that has become the #1 viewed episode of Cinematic. So, growing by leaps and bounds over here with Ryan Runs, and I hope that continues with this particular episode because it's kind of a dicey sequel proposition if you think about it. The first was just this wonderfully self-contained story that spoke volumes about a specific time and place. So what do we do now? Are we still at a cultural crossroads? I mean, we are historically, that's not going to change, but cinematically you can't retread, certainly when it comes to the characters, you can't just have a reset and we're doing the same thing we did last time. If it did do that, I probably wouldn't be here talking about it, honestly. Because I'm not like a huge believer in how some people say like the sequel can kind of invalidate the first movie in some ways. Like, I get it. I just think that first movie still exists in its original form for the most part. For most movies, this is like one of those ways that Star Wars has changed how we talk about movies. But for most movies that remain the same since the first day you saw them. So this isn't that, but as with any sequel, it's always an interesting question as to why. Why sequel, especially in this instance? Why not just a separate, and I know Hong Kong action has kind of a storied history when it comes to sequels and certainly naming sequels, where once they made it across or to the US or whatever, they would sometimes just pull a different title or sequel for marketing reasons. But story-wise, cinematically speaking, why? Because now we're figuring out like what's in the DNA of a franchise, right? And I don't know if Choi Hark went in with the intention of making this a multi-movie affair, but that's what we're looking at. So what did he bring in? Well, he did obviously bring back Wong Fei-hung, and he did bring back kind of a charmingly aloof Wong Fei-hung, although I do think he is quicker to act. Like, I don't think they did the thing where they kind of push the reset button. But he does still kind of have one foot in the 19th century. Like the movie opens on him taking a train to Canton with 13th Aunt and Ling Fung. And they go through a tunnel and everything goes black. And he's like, what's going on? And 13th Aunt is like, it's a tunnel, So yes, the era is also foregrounded like it was in the first. Right when they get to Canton, we get like some hefty debate amongst the people. In fact, we get another one of those shots like in the first where it just kind of sweeps throughout a marketplace or whatever it is, downtown. And it's, again, production values through the roof, that much. In fact, better. They're even better for the sequel. So we get all these great shots of kind of different townspeople discussing the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which of course ended the war between China and Japan in 1895 and forced China to cede Taiwan. And no, I didn't know any of this before the movie. I had to look all that up. I did actually take, it was Southeast Asian history in college. So I don't remember the Treaty of Shimonoseki from that course necessarily speaking, but you'll notice a theme throughout this episode, I think, when it comes to discussing some of the political movements of the time. But in the movie, it's all part of kind of a growing popular hostility towards foreign influence, a little bit like the first movie, except I think the stakes are probably a little bit higher. Things have probably gotten worse, and this is nowhere more embodied than in the White Lotus Society. So hey, check this out. I'm kind of topical with this one, except I have no idea what the show is about. I'm glad to hear people are enjoying it. Seems to be doing quite well. A lesser YouTuber would probably include that in the title to this video somehow. But here in this movie, we're talking about any number of White Lotus societies that popped up in China over the course of centuries, usually during times of political or social unrest. Whenever faith in the state is lacking, there's always someone there to pick up the slack somewhat. Specifically, for this movie, we're talking about the White Lotus Rebellion, which was when this particular White Lotus Society of the time kind of graduated a tax protest into, I guess, pretty much a full-on uprising. And no, I did not know any of this before the movie. Again, and I'm making it sound far neater than I think it historically was. Apparently, even just the moniker of a White Lotus Society was something that was often attributed by the government in referring to or trying to, put a name or a charge, probably more often than not, to some of these agitators. Here in the movie, they are kind of this hyper-nationalist religion? I guess the Wikipedia calls them a xenophobic cult, which is probably better, that has, quote, come as salvation to exorcise the evil spirits for the ages, is something taken directly from the subtitles there. But what they really do is give us like an all-timer of a first 5 to 10 minutes to this movie. And I've already mentioned how the production quality is already better than the last. That extends to the cinematography. Like there's this bit, we're within a, I guess, meeting of the White Lotus Society where the head priest is kind of going through what seems like a folk tale almost at first, but I think ends up being more of a prophecy. It's a bunch of, and I don't mean this, as an outsider looking in, gibberish, because we're shown by the end of the movie that the White Lotus Society is exploiting the populace with a lot of fancy words and trickery. So I guess what I'm saying is that it also worked on me because, combined with the actual, movie making of it all, because again, cinematography with the way the light is coming in through the window, the direction, but also the choreography, this is more, there's no like kung fu fighting going on necessarily. It's all kind of exhibitionist in nature. I don't know if it's strictly speaking, harkening back to those Hong Kong action movies where it would, start with a literal exhibition up top and kind of a zero space of sorts sometimes. This is definitely at the Church of the White Lotus or whatever you want to call it. But not just the choreography, but also how it's cut together. There's an amount of fudge making going on with some of these, especially when it comes to editing some of the kung fu together. And you let it go because it's also just technically powerful. But this seems like next level in the way some of it's cut together. Like I don't have to do many leaps at all, if any, with a lot of how they put this beginning sequence together. And then they bring in a dog, like a Dalmatian, in fact, who is made fun of as having a skin disease of some sort. And then they burn him in a big pile of Western, it's like a big Western effigy, essentially. So they're the bad guys. Like they literally do the thing, like you want, who was it? Was it Peckinpah or I feel like it was a spaghetti Western dude that was like, have the bad guy kill the dog. Okay, fine, I'll look it up. Okay, I'm either thinking about when Hitchcock said, quote, in the old days, villains had mustaches and kicked the dog. Audiences are smarter today, and then he goes on. Or I'm thinking about the George Lucas quote from his book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, where he said if he wanted to make the audience feel sad, all he would have to do was, quote, choke a kitten on screen, which is worse. So I don't know what I'm thinking about, and I don't want to think about it anymore. The White Lotus Society in this movie is quickly established as bad for our troupe of heroes. In fact, speaking of which, the gang is back. I did mention Jet Li as Wang Fei-hung already, I think, but also Rosamund Kwan as 13th Aunt. Lang Foon this time is actually played by Max Mock instead of Yun Bio. Max Mock was from, I at the very least in the series, seen him in Pedicab Driver and Magic Crystal. And Lam Sai Wing, played by Kent Chang in the last one that I loved so much, is just gone and forgotten. Like not even mentioned. This might be the most sequel thing about Once Upon a Time in China too. Just character gone, nobody remembers him. I was hoping it was going to be one of those things where they just take the whole movie not mentioning him so that by the time he shows up out of nowhere in the third act, it's kind of a nice needle drop. Because needle drops are back with this particular movie. In fact, the very first action sequence I'm going to say we get is when the White Lotus try to set up a demon expulsion altar at the telegraph office, which kind of becomes a target of theirs, which is also a pretty good symbol for their connection to the Western world, but also progress or encroachment. But in trying to set up this altar in front of the telegraph office, 13th Aunt tries to get a picture of it, and the White Lotus clock her in her Western getup and camera, and try to kidnap her. And then this is where Wong Fei-hung literally comes like flying into the, I think maybe walking across or on top of the crowd, into the fight, quickly dispatches everybody, saves 13th Aunt. And we even get it from one of the White Lotus, who has been summarily beaten, a "Who are you?" You know, and this would be the moment where Batman says Batman, or Rambo says your worst nightmare, or something like that. We get a full-on Wong Fei-hung from Foshan. The rolling close-up and everything that Ling Fun immediately steps on, by the way. So it's all here. And it kind of sets up the main conflict, or at least one side of it, because within the telegraph office, there is kind of a crooked government official by the name of Commander Lon, played by Donnie Yen, actually, if that's any more indication that we're dealing with a sequel, wherein the first one did quite well, is that now we're bringing in names like Donnie Yen. But he's also trying to quash a larger uprising that they've caught wind of, headed up by Lu Haodong and Sun Yat-sen, who I believe Wong Fei-hung meets at the conference. He at least meets Sun Yat-sen there. So that's how they're connected early on. So essentially we have two bad guys in this film. We've got the White Lotus Society and Commander Lon, or the Qing government. And you can probably guess which one of those would figure into the grand finale of this movie. It would be the one starring Donnie Yen. And I feel like I'm talking a lot about the kind of meta behind the movie, like why they made some of the decisions they did. But this movie does seem more aware of itself than the first one did, which makes complete sense, you know? And nobody's like actually winking at the camera. It's just hard to discount the blockbuster stylings of this one, even compared to the first, which I'm sure is in no small part thanks to, again, Yuen Woo-ping. This is a Yuen Woo-ping movie, by the way. He did all the martial arts direction. And I'm realizing now, I was so bummed after we talked about Once Upon a Time in China 1, because I forgot to mention the martial arts directors of that movie are Yun Chun-yi, Yuen Cheng-yan, both of which are Yuen Woo-ping's brothers, and Lau Kar-wing, who is Lau Kar-lung's brother. So Once Upon a Time in China 1, a real brothers affair, it turns out. But yes, Once Upon a Time in China 2 is a Yuen Woo-ping movie also, and it has like all of the inventiveness and fun that you would expect from one of his movies. Like there's this sequence of Jet Li fighting some guys underneath some stairs, and then by the time he gets to the bottom of the stairs, he like kicks the banister ball. What even is that thing? Like kicks it off into another guy. It's great. Like who even thinks of that? So yeah, I'd say the action in this one is actually better than it was in the first one. I mean, they're both good, but I'm finding a lot of things about the sequel, this one, better than they were in the first, actually. There's one thing, if I had to like, you know, maybe invent something here and pretend to have an issue with it. The first one, Once Upon a Time in China 1, kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, did manage to say something very specific about this time and place. Here it feels like they put a lot of the same elements in, obviously, historically speaking, even accurately, you know, to some degree. And it still says something. It just feels like it's not saying it as specifically as the first one did. This one feels more like a rumination, maybe. And what's, I think, extremely funny about that is that, you know what they could have done to maybe put a finer point on their message? They could have introduced like a bespoke character that really embodies what they're trying to say, kind of like they did in the first one with Iron Cloth, and then I complained about it, like it seemed like it was tacked on. So they could have tacked something on it. That's not true. Donnie Yen's character is roughly the analog of Iron Cloth in this one, I would say. I think Iron Cloth was a more sympathetic character in the first movie. Donnie Yen, it turns out, is basically willing to do whatever it takes to quash this rebellion. He dresses up his guys as the White Lotus so they can invade the British consulate. And in so doing, obviously a lot of people die, and Wong Fei-hung, I'll get to this in a second, is kind of animated towards seeking out the White Lotus after that. But by the end, Donnie Yen himself has killed the British commander by his own hands. So I don't think the character of Commander Lon does quite what Iron Cloth does for the first movie. but also because the heart of this thing really feels like it's in the White Lotus Society and embodied in that kind of finale. So when Wong Fei-hung is animated towards seeking out the White Lotus and kind of putting a stop to them finally, he finds that church and essentially pretends to join them so that he can kind of tease out the leader. And when that doesn't work, straight up pretends to be the deity Zhenwu to, again, lure out this main White Lotus priest by the name of Gao Kong. And when he finally does come out, they have kind of this like 4D game of the floor is lava. It really has this real dueling divinities feel to it, even though, well, I guess they're both doing impersonations, and it's just that Wong Fei-hung is there to kind of lay all that bare. And he does. When he finally bests Gao Kong and his followers just fall apart, essentially. Their zealotry laid bare. And I think the thing he has to say is that now they have to depend on themselves. So it's more of a thinker than I feel like what they do with the Donnie Yen fight after that, which is also very good, would you imagine? This is quite possibly two masters at the top of their game. And I don't say that like if we're looking at a bell curve, they've got a pretty large plateau, right, where the top of their game lasted decades as far as I'm concerned. And the Donnie Yen fight has some of that weight of history behind it as well. There's a MacGuffin that kind of pops up pretty late in the game. It's like a register of names. So Donnie Yen's whole thing is really tied to that story of the revolutionaries that are coming up that he's trying to quash as an agent of the Qing government. And they're trying to get away with the register. Ling Feng is trying to get away with that register. And Donnie Yen does not want him to, let's say, and employs some brilliant choreography to prevent it, but is eventually bested by Jet Li. I just think the White Lotus fight has more philosophy behind it, so that's probably my preference. But also I think it does bear that weight of history a little bit better. It's just more philosophically satisfying, right? Which is still wild for this movie that also gives us a ton of kung fu cake that we just, I'm gobbling it up. It's all so very good. But that's, I'm realizing, this franchise, right? If we're talking about what they're defining the Once Upon a Time series as, it's that you're going to get both sides of the coin and enjoy them almost as much. Like, I just cannot say enough good things about Once Upon a Time in China 2. And I hope 3. I went into this feeling like I had heard that the sequels got progressively less interesting, and so far that has not been the case. So happy to be proven wrong, but it won't be next week. Next week we might go back. So chronologically speaking, it would have been Hard Boiled, but I've seen that fairly recently and done a podcast on it elsewhere before. So when that happens, I like to bring in other people, my family usually, if it's a movie that I want to show them that I would love for them to see. And I want to do that with Hard Boiled. It's just that my family's been all over the place, so that was not going to be a possibility for this week. Hopefully that's a possibility for next week. If it's not, we're looking at a movie with a 3 in it. Let's just say, and that's either going to be Police Story 3, which I haven't vetted. I don't know anything about. It's up there. People talk about it, or Three Ninjas, which is also a movie people talk about. And I can't wait to see both. So whichever one that is, come on back, check it out. And thanks for hanging out this week. As always, you can find me on this channel, continuing to do things in other avenues, whether it be games or comics to some extent. Although the comics show, Chasers, is on a bit of a hiatus while we decide what box of cards we're going to get into next. And if you would like to take part in that, as always, there's Patreon and PayPal, links not far from where you're at. And then you too can be included amongst the likes of such brilliant and beautiful people as these.